Before we get into today's story, take a second to subscribe. We share real, emotional stories about trust, betrayal, and the things that break people from the inside. If that's the kind of truth you value, you're in the right place. Just after midnight, at Forward Operating Base Razor, hell broke loose. Hundreds of Taliban fighters descended from three sides. The fourth side was a cliff. No retreat, no reinforcements coming. This is the story of how a handful of Marines held the line through the longest night of their lives, and why some never made it home. But before the screaming started, before the dust and blood and fire, there was a kind of peace. FOB Razor sat perched on a jagged ledge in the eastern Afghan mountains, nothing but wind and silence around it. From the outside, it looked like a forgotten construction site. Sandbags, plywood huts, rusted Conex boxes stacked like Legos. We were ghosts out there. No one came unless they had to, and most didn't. Our job was to monitor a known smuggling corridor and intercept whatever insurgents thought they could sneak past our wire. For weeks, we saw nothing. Then we started seeing shadows. I was Gunnery Sergeant Daniel Meyer, platoon sergeant for 3rd Squad, 2nd Platoon, Echo Company. Been in since '95. 2 tours in Iraq, now 1 in Afghanistan. I wasn't the kind of man who needed a war to feel useful, but I knew what I was good at. I kept my boys alive, or tried to. We had 23 Marines on rotation at Razor. No tanks, no air assets stationed with us. Just boots, rifles, and a string of mortar tubes. Some days the most dangerous thing we dealt with was food poisoning from the MRE Chili Mac. Other days we'd pick up distant gunfire on the ridge and go quiet. But this one day, was the last normal day we ever had. It started with Foster being too loud, as usual. Lance Corporal Nate Foster, half Puerto Rican, half Chaos, was doing shirtless pull-ups between 2 steel poles, sweat dripping like he was in a GQ shoot. He was the kind of Marine who treated the war like a pre-game warm-up for something bigger. A clown, sure, but when the bullets flew, he was all steel. Said he wanted to open a boxing gym when he got out. Called it Foster's House of Hurt. The kid had heart, and maybe more guts than sense. Corporal Jennings' Tex was next to the Hesco wall, chewing tobacco and assembling a busted radio with the patience of a surgeon. He didn't talk much unless he was quoting Clint Eastwood or talking about smoked brisket. Waco boy, born with grit in his teeth. You could rely on Tex like you could rely on gravity. Private First Class Eli Ramos, our F&G, sat in the shade of a Humvee, writing a letter home. He did that every day without fail, always to his kid sister back in Albuquerque. He was a little soft around the edges, not the best shot, but he listened. Wanted to be a teacher one day, said he had a thing for literature. The other guys razzied him for it, but when Ramos spoke, people actually paused to hear it. He had this quiet courage, not the kind that shows up in war movies. The real kind. Then there was Doc Booker, our Navy corpsman. He was older than the rest of us by at least a decade. Calm eyes, tight lips, hands that never shook. He'd done more deployments than he'd admit. Probably saw more death than most gravediggers. But somehow he was always the one reminding the boys to hydrate, to write home, to laugh when it hurt. He was the glue. The day moved like molasses. We ran perimeter drills, checked the mortar tubes, rotated guard shifts. I inspected the ammo dump personally, something I did every Thursday. The 5.56 rounds were sealed tight. The Mark 19 had been cleaned and greased, and the 240 Bravos were locked and loaded. You could hear the metallic rhythm of Foster racking his weapon just for fun. Ramos would flinch every time. At lunch, someone found a can of peaches buried in a resupply crate, and it turned into a unit-wide celebration. MRE peanut butter was passed around like contraband. Tex said he'd trade his next 3 dessert packs for a clean pair of socks. I told him that was a bad deal. No one trades socks in Afghanistan. You guard your socks like gold. Later that afternoon, a patrol unit returned from a ridge sweep. No movement, they reported, but the air fell off. Even the wind had stopped moving. The birds were gone. That's something you learn to notice out here. When nature holds its breath, something's coming. Malik, our local interpreter, came to me after dinner. Thin man, always a little nervous, but good at his job. He pointed to the west and muttered, "They are watching." From there. Maybe 2 days now. You sure? I asked, already knowing the answer. He nodded, his voice dropping. Too quiet. The men, they move like ghosts. Not farmers. Not children. I thanked him and walked the perimeter again that night, this time slower. I watched the ridge lines through my NVGs, static. Then movement. Just a flicker. Gone before I could confirm it. Could have been a goat. Could have been something worse. Back in the tent, the boys were gathered around a busted speaker. Foster had convinced someone to play old hip-hop tracks off a flash drive. Ramos bobbed his head, eyes closed. Tex cleaned his rifle with mechanical precision. Doc sat quietly, filing reports by red lamp light. I didn't say much. I just watched, memorized their faces. Something in me knew. You don't always get a warning before a storm, but this felt like one. The kind that doesn't knock, it kicks the damn door in. Before lights out, I pulled Foster aside. You got your gear tight. Always gunny. Extra mags. 4. Pretty flag. Good. Sleep with your boots on tonight. He didn't even ask why. Just nodded and went quiet. An hour later, I walked the camp one last time. Moonlight glinted off the steel. Tex was on watch up in Tower 2, scanning with his scope. Ramos slept curled up with his pack under his head like a pillow. Doc was still awake, reading something in a notebook. Probably a letter he never finished. I crawled into my cot. Gear beside me, boots still on. Didn't even close my eyes. And when the first mortar slammed into the south wall, just after midnight, I was already upright, rifle in hand, breath steady. So this is it, I thought. This is where we hold the line. The first explosion didn't sound real. Not first. It was too sudden, too sharp. Then came the second and the third, and the night lit up like a broken sky. Mortars. At least 3 impacts near the south wall. The ground shook under our boots. Sandbags split open like guts, and dust flooded the air. I was already moving before the echo finished. I threw the door flap open, rifle in hand, and ran straight into the chaos. Tex's voice barked through the radio. Contact. South wall. Multiple. They're climbing the wire. My brain snapped into combat mode like an old switch flipped. I didn't think. I didn't feel. I just moved. I shouted into the radio, Ramos. Foster. Defensive positions now. Booker, get the aid station ready. We're under attack. Through the NVGs, I saw movement. Dozens of figures pouring down from the ridgelines. Fast. Coordinated. This wasn't a probing attack. This was a full-force assault. The first rounds cracked through the air, tracers ripping like fireflies on speed. Our southern machine gun, Nest, came alive, 240 Bravo, spitting lead into the dark. Someone screamed behind me. Couldn't tell who. I dropped to one knee and returned fire. Shadows dropped. Others kept coming. Foster was already dragging ammo crates from the stockpile, tossing magazines to anyone who needed them. He shouted over the gunfire. We're getting swarmed, Gunny. They're coming from the east, too. I cursed. The east side had less cover, more open ground. They were trying to split us. I grabbed the radio again. Tex, shift your team to east flank. Now. Ramos, stick with me. Doc, start triage at Bunker 3. And then the comms died. Dead static. Rain of gunfire. Tex was shouting, but it was garbled, now radio interference, maybe enemy jamming. I tossed the radio aside and turned to Ramos. He was shaking, but steady, rifle braced to his shoulder. You stay with me, I said. Don't try to be a hero. Shoot what you see and keep your damn head down. He nodded, jaw clenched. His first real fight. The base was roaring now, gunfire, yelling explosions. The air reeked of cordite and burned nylon. The Taliban fighters had crept within 100 yards and were closing in fast, swarming like ants. They came from the south and east in waves, line after line. RPGs slung over shoulders, AKs flashing in the dark. I saw one of our guys, Patterson, take a direct hit and drop like a puppet with cut strings. No time to think. No time to mourn. We pushed them back with grenades and mortar fire, hand aim now, since targeting systems were useless in the interference. Foster was manning the Mark 19 grenade launcher, thumb slamming the trigger like he was back in the gym. The recoil slammed his shoulder, but he didn't stop. Doc Booker dragged wounded into the dugout bunker, his hands soaked red, eyes locked in. He didn't flinch when rounds whizzed past his head. He just kept working. The western flank started cracking next. Another wave from that side, RPGs lighting up the sky. I ran the line from bunker to bunker, shouting orders, pointing positions, helping reload. We had less than 25 guys holding off what had to be 100 insurgents. Our NVGs were half useless with the muzzle flashes and flares. At one point, the enemy launched illumination rounds, bright white light flooding the FOB, casting long shadows. Made it feel like theater, like we were on stage. Ramos was firing controlled bursts. 2 bodies dropped. I clapped him on the back. Good shooting, Marine. He turned to respond, and that's when the RPG hit. It struck near the east tower. Shrapnel exploded in every direction. I hit the ground hard, ears ringing, vision blurry. When I scrambled up, I saw Ramos on the ground. Still, too still. I screamed for document. He was already moving. "Come on, kid," I muttered, crouching next to him. "Stay with me." Doc checked his vitals. His face was grim. Ramos didn't make it. And just like that, the first of us was gone. I didn't have time to grieve. Not yet. We were still in the storm. They pushed again at 0300 hours. From all 3 sides now. I ordered a fallback to the central defense line, our last stand position. Tex and Foster regrouped there, bloodied but standing. Our ammo was running low. Comms were still dead. Air support wasn't coming. Foster looked at me through soot-covered goggles. "We're not going to make it, are we?" I met his eyes. "We hold until dawn. That's it. No one gets through that line." We fortified with whatever we had left, spare sandbags, empty crates, even body armor from the fallen. The air was thick with smoke and the coppery stench of blood. I could barely hear anything over the gunfire and pounding in my ears. The Taliban switched tactics. They started using human waves fighters pushing up in clusters, some carrying satchels, others lobbing makeshift explosives made from cooking pots and ball bearings. Our machine guns chewed through the first few, but then the barrels began to overheat. Tex screamed for water to cool his weapon. I tossed him my canteen without looking. He doused the 240 Bravo and went right back to mowing them down. Somewhere near the west wall, I heard a scream turn into a gurgle. Alvarez. I found him face down in the dirt, a jagged piece of rebar through his leg. I grabbed him under the armpits and dragged him to Doc's position. The whole time, bullets cracked past our heads like angry hornets. At one point, they breached the outer wire. 3 fighters made it into the compound. One had a suicide vest. Tex dropped 2. Foster tackled the third and shot him point blank. The vest didn't go off, must have been a dud. We were lucky. "Gunny," someone shouted. "We're out of claymores." I felt my stomach drop. Claymores had been our insurance policy. Now we were raw. Nothing between us and them but grit. I ordered the last 2 mortars launched point blank into the east corridor. It was insane, dangerous, but effective. The blast knocked 3 of our guys off their feet, but it also bought us 10 minutes. Foster had a gash across his forehead, blood running into his eye. He wiped it and kept going. Tex had lost hearing in 1 ear. Doc had used up all the morphine. Guys were patching each other with duct tape and gauze. And still they kept coming. By 0500 hours, we were down in knives and pistols. The M4S were dry, the machine guns empty. But the fighting didn't stop. It turned into close quarters trench brawls and hand-to-hand. I saw Foster bash someone's skull in with the butt of his rifle. Tex drove a bayonet through a man's chest. I don't remember pulling my trigger anymore. I was just swinging, shoving, bleeding, breathing. They started burning tires near the ridgeline to mask their movements in the thick, black smoke. Visibility dropped to inches. Shadows darted past us, friend or foe, no way to tell. We fought in confusion. Every noise could be death. One of the Taliban fighters grabbed Doc during a rescue. He stabbed him in the shoulder before I shot him through the head. Doc didn't even flinch. He tore off part of his shirt and kept working, blood dripping down his sleeve. Foster ran out of ammo and started using a pry bar he found in the tool shed. He was screaming with every swing. By then, half his gear was gone. Just blood, sweat, and rage. We dragged the wounded into a ditch we used as a trench line. It became the last line. Every second felt eternal. I remember praying not out loud, just inside my head. I didn't pray for survival. I prayed they didn't get through, that they didn't kill the kids, that we made them bleed for every inch. Finally, just as the first orange streaks hit the horizon, we heard it. The hum of helicopters. The insurgents heard it too. The momentum broke. They started retreating, dragging their wounded, disappearing back into the hills. We didn't cheer. We didn't speak. We just stood there, heaving, soaked in smoke and blood, staring at the bodies. We had held the line, but it had cost us more than we could count. The silence after the siege was not peace. It was a vacuum, a crushing stillness that settled like dust after an explosion, thick and choking. The kind of quiet that doesn't soothe, it haunts. Dawn didn't bring celebration. It revealed the wreckage. Shattered bodies, burnt sandbags, blackened gear, bullet holes torn through every surface of the base. The rising sun cast long, golden shadows over forward operating base Razor, but couldn't warm the dead. It couldn't mend what had been broken. We had held the line. Barely. Reinforcements arrived just after 0600 hours. Dust clouds kicked up by the inbound helos choked the sky as the C-47 Chinooks touched down, rotors screaming, men pouring out late, but alive. Too late for some of ours. I stood near the perimeter wall, still clutching my M, for even though the magazine was empty. I didn't realize my knuckles were white until Tex walked up beside me and gently pried the weapon from my grip. "You can breathe now, Gunny," he said, voice hoarse, eyes rimmed red. "They're gone." But I didn't feel like I could. I felt like if I let go for even a second, the weight of the last 24 hours would crush me. I looked over at the makeshift trench, where Doc was still treating the wounded. His shoulder was bandaged with duct tape. Blood soaked through anyway. We lost 12 Marines that night. 12. Good men. Some still boys. Ramos was one of them. His body had been pulled from the rubble near the East Tower. His helmet was cracked in half. He still had the photo of his mom tucked into his pocket. I found it when I helped carry his body to the casualty collection point. There was no ceremony. Not yet. No time. Just zippered bags, names logged, and silence. So much damn silence. Foster sat on a crate near the ammo dump, staring at nothing. His pry bar, the one he'd used to fend off attackers, lay on the ground at his feet, slick with dry blood. His left eye was nearly swollen shut. His hand shook, though he didn't seem to notice. I walked up, crouched beside him. "You all right?" I asked. He shook his head, slow. I kept thinking I was going to die, and then I didn't. But I don't know why I didn't. I didn't have an answer. None of us did. It wasn't about skill anymore. It wasn't even about bravery. Sometimes it was just who happened to be standing an inch to the left when the shrapnel came. Tex helped Doc identify the fallen. Alvarez, Patterson, Kelly, Kane, Vasquez, Ramos, Moore, Jenkins. 8 others wounded, 3 critically. One was unconscious, barely clinging to life. Doc did everything he could, but we had run out of proper supplies long before the sun rose. The new unit from Kandahar brought stretchers, fresh IVs, and a medevac chopper. They took the worst of the wounded first. I stood at the LZ, helping load them. Foster refused a stretcher. Said he'd walk. I didn't argue. After the medevac lifted off, I walked the base perimeter with Texas. We counted the enemy bodies. 43. At least that's how many we could see. Blood trails led off into the hills. They'd carried their wounded away. Maybe to treat them. Maybe to bury them. We'd never know. The base was a shell. Every corner had signs of the fight: bullet-scarred barriers, cratered walkways, burnt-out guard posts. Smoke still curled from a storage hut. The armory had taken a mortar hit. Its roof collapsed inward like a punched-in face. Our satellite dish was in pieces. Comms were still unreliable. By noon, we finally got a stable line to HQ. They asked for a situation report. I gave it, voice even, eyes fixed on the horizon. We held the base. Sutai 12 8 wounded. Minimal equipment functional. We need reinforcement and resupply. Immediate. They said they were proud of us. Said they'd recommend commendations. They didn't say what that would bring back. We buried the dead that evening. There was no chaplain. No flux. Just us. I stood at the head of the trench. We dug a long, narrow scar in the dirt and read out the names. Lance Corporal Emilio Ramos. Private First Class Benjamin Patterson. Sergeant Eric Alvarez. Each name was followed by silence. Then Tex would lower the next bag in. Then silence again. When it was over, we stood there in a circle. No one spoke. Doc was the only one who cried. Back in the barracks, what was left of them, we sat in quiet clusters. Some smoked. Some drank what little was left in the stash. Foster found a half-burnt deck of cards and laid them out, as if muscle memory might distract him. No one joined. I picked up Ramos's journal that night. I found it in his bunk, under his pillow. He'd written about his mom, about how he was going to take her to the ocean when he got back. Said she'd never seen the ocean before. Said he wanted to see her face when she touched the water. I closed the journal. Didn't have the heart to read more. Tex limped over and sat beside me. He had a bandage wrapped around his thigh, blood soaking through. He lit a cigarette with hands that trembled. "We'll never be the same," he said, not looking at me. "No," I agreed. He took a long drag. But we held it. All of us. Even the ones who didn't make it. He was right. Holding the line wasn't just about geography. It wasn't just sandbags and rifles. It was about standing between chaos and those who couldn't. It was about choosing not to run, even when the smart move was to get the hell out. It was about protecting your brothers with your own flesh and blood. That night, I wrote the letters. 12 of them. One for each family. One for each Marine we lost. I told them their sons were brave. That they didn't die alone. That they mattered. I didn't say the things I wanted to say. Like how scared they were. Like how some of them cried out for their moms. Like how I'd failed to protect them. You don't put that in a letter. We stayed at FOB Razor another week, waiting for the full support team to relieve us. During that time, we built a memorial wall with leftover concrete slabs. We painted their names. Left helmets on top, boots underneath, dog tags nailed to the sides. It wasn't regulation, but it was ours. Foster started speaking again by day 3. He told stories, funny ones, mostly, like how Alvarez used to snore so loud we'd throw boots at him the night. Or how Ramos once tried to barter MRE jalapeno cheese for extra Wi-Fi. We laughed. It felt strange. Guilty. But it helped. By the end of the week, replacements arrived. Clean uniforms. Fresh faces. A new CO. They looked at us like we were ghosts. I handed over the command log. Walked them through the base. Showed them where the breaches happened. Where the fighting was thickest. Where the graves were. Then we boarded the outbound chopper. As the base shrank beneath us, I looked down at the trench. At the memorial wall. At the place where hell came down and we refused to break. That was the last time I saw FOB Razor. Now, years later, people ask what happened. They want the details, the battle tactics, the heroics. But most of all, they want to know how we did it, how we held the line. And I tell them, we didn't do it because we were fearless. We did it because we were family. Because when it all came down to it, we weren't fighting for a flag or for orders or even for the mission. We were fighting for the man next to us. And that's what held the line. Thanks for watching. If the story meant something to you, consider subscribing. We've got more like this, stories that don't ask for sympathy, just honesty.